Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Barden. I'm a current PhD student at LSU focusing in experimental music and digital media. And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the aspects of wanting to compose with theme and variation form as a technique and kind of how you can utilize the characteristics of this technique in order to create an effective composition. All right. So why would you want to do this? I mean, assuming you want to write, you're going to write this music, you'd want to write this out to begin with. Um, this is a very versatile form of music. All right, you have a theme and you have variations. Okay, so you can go in and you can really tweak it and get in and just go wild. There are rules to go with, and we'll talk about that, but it's a lot less strict than other forms that you might come across in music. All right, so you can be just extremely flexible. If you don't like something, move it somewhere else, take it out, completely change it. There's no formal repercussions to just completely rechanging the order if you feel like it. Now, there might be artistic repercussions, and we'll get into that later. Um, but it's not like if you were to write a sonata form and you didn't like the order of things, so you just decided to change up put the development at the end and change things around. The audience isn't going to come at it with the expectations of everything being in an exact order. So you can be very flexible with the order of all of your variations. Essentially, when you're going at this, you start with an idea, you change it a different way, change it some more, change it a little less. That's essentially the core of this. So because of that, that's why you can be flexible. You've just created all of these changes, so you can pick and choose exactly where they would want to go. Because of this, you can experiment as a composer. All right, so you can pick one little thing that you think you might want to focus on in this variation and just see what happens. And there's a lot more room and a lot more forgiveness in setting up your music, so you experiment in this particular form rather than trying to experiment in other ways but still wanting to fit into those rules so it's identifiable as a form. In this regard, because of everything I mentioned so far, you can really just dive in and see what works and what doesn't with your music. Right, so yes, you can make your themes and variations just as they can be simple little progressions from the theme. It can be super complex and varied, just as much as you as the composer would want. And you're able to do this just because of the extreme flexibility of the form. And just at least in my personal experience, I should say, this allows the composers to generate a large amount of material for this single project. They're saying what works, what doesn't. So you essentially get pages and pages and pages of music then you can either use all of them or just whittle it down to get just the best ones to use in your final product. Um, and you, like I said, you can focus on just one tiny little aspect and see just how much you can focus and really limit the scope of your variations, but still maintain the characteristics of your theme. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Um, and as I said, at the core, this is still just a very straightforward musical form. All right, essentially, what you're doing, you're presenting a theme, and then you're changing it. That's at the core. That's what it is. All right. So how can we go about setting this up? Um, one thing before we get into the details of a theme and variation, I just want to talk briefly about some of the kind of what I'm calling this the main elements of music. All right, and this is speaking with very broad strokes here, talking about music in general has a pitch content, a rhythm content, a timbral aspect to all of the sounds being presented. Essentially, all music has some of this, these three elements in some ratio throughout its existence, and these ratios can change, different amounts as to, you know, here's a little Venn diagram. So some combination of, say, pitch, rhythm, timbral content, can all exist in a piece of music. It can be that maybe, say drone music has, pitch and timbral, but no real rhythmic content. Noise music, is all timbre and rhythm and not real pitch, or things like that. It can be all kinds of different combinations. I'm not saying that your music has to have this exact element in it, or these things. And, I'm not telling you how to write music. I'm telling you how to write music in this form. So, why am I getting at this? Well, when you're writing your theme, you want it to be a well constructed piece of music, whatever is going into that. Um, but when you're setting up your variations, as we'll see later on, you're going to want to focus on these elements of your theme and make them the focus of your variation. Um, all right, so let's look at a simple theme just to figure out exactly what I'm talking about. I threw together this real simple melody. It's nothing, to write home about. It's just a short little one for the purposes of this presentation. I want to emphasize short, as we'll see later. Some of these themes tend to be longer. I just threw this together for the presentation, so I'll just play this real quick. All right, so we have that there. So let's pretend that this was a theme and variation theme, and we're gonna write all the variations to go along with this. Someone said, "Hey, I really like this melody. I want you to write a theme and variations on it. I'll pay you a bunch of money." And you said, "Okay." So how would you go about doing this? Um, what would you need to do in order to get from here to a much larger, much more grand piece of work, rather than just a little five measure melody? Um, let's start by breaking down the melody into just the key little characteristics that make up essentially the essence of what it is. How many things can you identify about this piece? For me, when I'm, say I wrote my own theme, I'll be jotting this down as I'm going, or if I'm doing variations on someone else's, I'll be analyzing it to find certain things. What's the main key of the music? What's the pitch material that's being used? Does it modulate? Does it not? If it does, where does this happen in the theme? The rhythmic content, is it fairly straightforward? Is it subdivided? Is there multimeters going on? What goes into it in that regard? uh, and then just talking about the dynamics. Is it pretty much the same? Does it shift? Does it change? Are there tons of articulations, some more than others? Does the instrumentation change if it's multiple instruments? For this one, I just picked a clarinet sound, just kind of arbitrarily. But if you're using an ensemble, you could change up the instrumentation later on. These are all things that you can think about, and this is just a short little list for the sake of time. But just all of these little elements of the music, the pitch, the rhythm, the timbre, what goes into these themes that you can use in order to generate all of your variations. So by writing that down and just focusing on one element. So let's say the pitch material. This particular one is kind of a E Phrygian-esque kind of presentation there. So how would you potentially change that up moving forward in a variation? Would you change the mode, change the key, or the main tonic? What can you do? The limits are non-existent. All right. So let's say we've got everything up and going. We've got our theme. We looked at that on the last slide here. So we've got our theme. We've yeah, kind of assuming you're writing your own, you'll have give it these characters or figure out what the characteristics are if you're not writing your own. Keeping in mind, the pitch, the rhythm, the timbre, things like that. Um, all right, and then start simple. Again, pick one of those elements, and then just focus on that for a simple variation. So, say you want to write another variation that's the only thing you're changing is the pitch or the articulations, or you're just doing a real simple. You're expanding it or contracting certain rhythmic values. Just something, one thing. Start off as simple as you can think of, just as a place to start. Um, and then keep going, keep tweaking it more and more, change more things as you're writing these. Make them significantly longer, more orchestrated, less orchestrated. Just get more and more abstracted from that original. But like I said, just start simple. Um, we'll get into that later on. One thing I like to do, after I've kind of generated my first or second round of variations to get some really wild ones, is to essentially start doing some simple variations of my variations. So that way we're getting things that are still related to the theme, but they're super tangential and out there. Um, this pretty much allows you to just push the limits of your compositional creativity and just see what it is that you can do. Right, and you'll be surprised just how much when you take away the main restrictions of that and are just focusing on the one element there and pushing it as far as you can. In my experience, I find that I'm surprised at what works. So getting things that are kind of simple and related to the theme and things that are super out there uh, are very important steps, and we'll talk about why in just a second. Um, but once you've got all of these variations, all of those simple and um, out there ones, just compile them all into one collection. All right, so you can see all of the variations together and kind of organize them a bit just in a way that you can see everything you've got. I personally like to kind of organize mine, kind of from, least, different from the theme to most different, um, kind of in that order, and see where things go from there. Um, from there, I like to kind of form a large scale progression of the music. You can, and several composers have, made several theme and variation compositions just by saying, okay, here's theme, variation, 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 variation. Um, and you can do that if you want. Personally, I find that fairly boring. As a listener, I'll know exactly when I'll determine the pattern. I'll know exactly what to expect, and if something doesn't follow the pattern, I'll know that it didn't follow the pattern. It basically eliminates the kind of sense of surprise for me personally. Um, so I like to connect, maybe not all, but the majority of my variations together. And to do this, I'm trying to plot out what happens in the piece. Is there maybe a large scale modulation? Does the talking about the range of the music or the dynamic, or just some kind of progression from beginning to end, and it's different for every piece. But planning this out just like a formal diagram for any other piece, and then I go in and pretty much I always start with the theme. That's one of the few rules in setting up the form, is you almost always start with the theme. Um, but I'll start there, and then I'll play around with the order of my variations. If I've printed them out, it's very easy just to, physically move them around and change the order, and just see what comes up. See what fits my progression of music that I'm looking for. Um, Having those simpler variations that are fairly close to the theme are good ways of having the audience almost like a playing the a recapitulation, but without just directly repeating yourself. And then having those abstracted themes are great ways to really move away and come back, so you get that contrast versus similarity going on, while still being a just variations on a similar theme. So you get elements from other types of music that can be pulled into yours. And kind of the main question I ask is it interesting from start to finish? Have you written music that isn't boring? As I said before, just having chunks of music can get boring. Um, Sometimes I'll have just like a large idea to go along with that. And then that should have come up earlier. I have a just a little diagram for kind of organizing all of your themes and your variations into different little categories. Um, so we've got that. I've talked a bit about kind of the process and just a few tips here, um, just for making sure that your themes and variations are just nice and effective. Um, oh, just write more variations than you plan to use. Again, just having a large variety of materials that you can pull from and just manipulate and see what works. In my experience, is better than just say if you know you're going to have 5 variations. If you only write 5 variations, you are extremely limited with what you can do. So having more than that just opens up the more possibilities, and you can pick and choose the best ones around there. All right. And so you don't have to use all of them. You can just focus on the very best variations you have. Um, Creating just a variety of different interpretations and styles of this theme can be a great way to get more variations without having to really change stuff. So if say you wrote a basic theme, you can maybe using like a suite interpretation, you'll make it a waltz, make it something fast in 6/8 or some other kind of dance. Changing up the theme, turn it into a dirge, but it's still that same core melody and harmonic content right there. You've then created a variation, and you can use that as some kind of pivot point in the larger scale of your music if you need to. All right. So this is a key one, I think, and this really combats the whole chunk, 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 chunk thing I've been going on about. And just don't make all your variations the same length. I'm not going to go all the way back to it, but that previous little melody I had was only about 5 measures long. So don't make all of your variations 5 measures. Mix it up. Make some longer. Make some shorter by different amounts. Again, just to remove the repetitiveness that can become an issue in this form. You don't want your audience to be bored. And then especially, there's no rule that says you do or don't have to pause between each variation. I just definitely think about when it happens in my music, because again, I don't want the audience just to get into a bored rhythm. And the last one is just to kind of experiment with how much variation you can get away with. You push the envelope when writing music in this form, because it's in terms of what you can get away with, it's probably more than you think. Again, I referenced sonata form earlier. That's a very strict form for listeners. They expect the first theme and the second, the modulation, and then development, and then we recap in the tonic and all that. You can experiment and push the boundaries more and more with this. And this is my personal experience, as I've said throughout, it's generally more than you think you can get away with and still have a cohesive piece of music. So don't be afraid to push that envelope. And I cut off a little bit in my video corner there, but if you push that boundary and it bursts and you hate it or it doesn't work, you can always take it out. And that's why you want to write more variations than you plan to use. All right. And it's just kind of going over a few things, just summarizing a few of the main points I made. Having variety of variations that all relate back to elements of the main theme, making each variation kind of strong on its own, and they kind of form a cohesive unit on the macro level. Um, those are kind of the main four elements there of just making an effective theme and variation. Um, so you don't want the one particular element to be just a horrible variation, because that'll just kind of wreck the piece as a whole. The audience isn't going to just say, I'm going to go listen to variation 19 of this thing. They're, generally speaking, unless you're Elgar, people are going to listen to the whole thing at once in a performance. And so you want every one of them to be good and to be connected from beginning to end. I have a short little theme and variation here, just to kind of go along with the one I had before. I'm not going to play all of it for the sake of time, but pretty much I'm just going to play through the main theme and the main theme and the last variation, I'll say. Pretty much just it's Beethoven Opus 76. Just some thoughts to think about. We'll have a theme in D major that shifts to B minor. There's a simple repetitive rhythm, and the general range is fairly narrow. I just want to think, how does some of these and other elements come through in the piece as we get through it. Again, this is a fairly short composition. I'm not going to go through all of it for the sake of time. We have this here. Tonic. So this one, we get that same more or less narrow range. We just moved up on the keyboard. The same kind of idea with modulations, constant notes. And it's just getting more and more changed as we go. Beethoven's not manipulating, pausing in between each one. I'm gonna jump ahead a bit. Too far. Alright, going into the last variation. Oh, okay, we'll play the last two. Right, so here we get this big, elaborate version of the original theme. We still get that D major switching to B minor for a second. Other elements going into it, referring a little bit to some of the other variations. You get kind of the running notes, the fast 16ths. It's all kind of coming through to form this large-scale composition from beginning to end. I'm going to stop now because this is the longest variation. It goes on for a bit. But just for the sake of time, I'm going to wrap that up now. And I'm just going to end this off with just a few examples of some other theme and variation compositions outside of this one that I just showed you. This is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just ones that I've personally worked with or performed in a performance, or we talked about in different theory or composition courses. So I have that there. Yeah, so that's it. So thank you all very much, and I will see you